I'm Alexandra Carter, 32, living two very different lives. Today, I arrived at our annual family reunion dressed in my usual modest clothes and light makeup. My Aunt Sylvia gave me a cold look and a familiar sneer, still just a secretary. Poor girl, she mocked, sparking laughter around the room. If only they knew I was actually leading Horizon Innovations, now valued at $350 million. Little did they suspect that tomorrow, crucial $100 million deal would require my signature as CEO. Before I explain how I built my empire in secret, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit subscribe if you want more. Stories about women who defy expectations and rise to success. Growing up in the Carter household meant living with material comfort but emotional distance. Our 5-bedroom colonial in Connecticut projected success to outsiders, but warmth was rare, especially for me. My parents, Elaine and Thomas Carter, built Carter Enterprises from scratch, a real estate development company that was struggling by the time I was a teenager. Still, we kept up appearances, and my parents had clear expectations. My 3 older brothers Ethan, Matthew, and Daniel were prepared for the family business from early on. Ethan, 6 years older than me, was the strategic thinker. Matthew, even older, was a natural salesman. Daniel, just 2 years ahead of me, was the charming one who could persuade investors. And then there was me, the afterthought, the girl who was expected to focus on more appropriate activities. Family dinners were business meetings where my brothers pitched ideas and received feedback. When I tried to join, my contributions were dismissed as cute at best and annoying at worst. Business isn't really for women, Alexandra, my father would say, not unkindly, but with certainty. Your brothers have the right temperament for it. My mother, who gave up a promising marketing career to support my father, added, there are other ways to contribute, dear, but the harshest was my Aunt Sylvia, my father's sister, who divorced and married into wealth without working a day in her life. She declared herself the family's moral authority. A lady doesn't concern herself with profit margins. She told me at 13, focus on your looks and finding a good husband. That's your real investment. The only family member who truly believed in me was my grandmother Eleanor, my father's mother, a widow who had managed the books for my grandfather's business for 30 years without recognition. She saw something others missed. They underestimate quiet waters, she'd whisper during our private talks, but deep rivers move with purpose. Grandma Eleanor secretly funded my business classes in high school and encouraged my ideas. When she passed away at 22, I lost my only supporter. She left me a modest inheritance, enough to finish school, but not to start a business, and, more importantly, the confidence to follow my path. One memory still drives me. At 16, after overhearing my father worry about falling profits, I spent weeks studying Carter Enterprises operations. I created a detailed presentation with new marketing ideas and cost-cutting strategies. I practiced for days, sure this would be my chance to prove myself. I still remember the blue folder in my hands and the nervous sweat on my palms as I stood. At the dinner table, I've been thinking about ways to improve our market position, I began. The amused smiles faded, replaced by awkward looks between my parents. My brother snickered after I finished. Silence fell. Then my father said, that's creative, Alexandra, but business is more complicated than you think. Those ideas won't work in the real world, Ethan added. Maybe focus on the school dance committee instead. Matthew suggested something similar, while Daniel tried to be kind. Interesting thoughts, but you're missing key points. Aunt Sylvia, visiting that weekend, gave the final blow. Elaine, Thomas, you should steer her toward more fitting interests. A pretty girl like her should find a husband to provide, not play with business. They all laughed. I held back tears, gathered my papers, and left the table determined. I would succeed on my own terms, and one day they'd regret underestimating me. College was my escape. I attended State University, not the Ivy League schools my brothers went to. My parents saw it as a step down but paid the tuition, expecting me to find a husband there at least. What they didn't know was I was double majoring in business administration and computer science, taking extra classes and working during the day to cover the costs. In my sophomore year, I met Professor Diana Lawrence, the first person since my grandmother to take my ambitions seriously. A former tech executive who had built and sold 2 companies before teaching, she became my mentor. Do you have something rare, Alexandra? She said after reviewing my case study analysis. You spot patterns others miss and find opportunities where others see obstacles. With her guidance, I improved my skills and built a network beyond my family's world. I interned at tech companies during summers, telling my family I was just an administrative assistant. It wasn't a total lie, started in administrative roles but quickly impressed managers with my insights and dedication. I graduated with honors, but my family still saw my degree as a nice achievement before settling down. At my graduation dinner, Aunt Sylvia asked when I'd put that degree to use. Finding a husband with potential. She smirked. I smiled and said I was considering my options. By then, I had already decided to build something on my own and to do it quietly, out of their sight. If they couldn't see my worth, I wouldn't waste energy convincing them. I'd show them when the time was right. I took what seemed like a modest executive assistant role at a mid-sized tech company, much to my family's disappointment. What they didn't know was my plan was already underway. I was positioning myself at the intersection of real estate and technology space. I knew well from growing up in the family business, but with fresh ideas they never considered. I deliberately avoided joining Carter Enterprises, where I'd be stuck in a junior role regardless of my abilities. Instead, I chose Tech Forward, a company focused on business solutions. To my family, it was an executive assistant job. In reality, I started in business development as a stepping stone. During weekly calls, I told my mother I was learning the office environment. She was relieved I had realistic expectations. My father barely acknowledged the job, only asking if the benefits were good. My brothers often teased me about fetching coffee for real business people. I let them believe whatever they wanted. At Tech Forward, I fully immersed myself in understanding how technology was changing traditional industries. I volunteered for extra projects, worked weekends, and absorbed everything I could about emerging tech trends. I was especially interested in how property management and real estate development, my family's business, were ripe for technological disruption. 6 months in, I identified a significant gap in the market. Property developers were relying on outdated methods to track project progress, manage contractors, and ensure regulatory compliance. These inefficiencies were costing millions. Using skills from my computer science classes, I developed a prototype solution in my spare time. When I showed it to my manager, Jacob Rue, he was impressed enough to arrange a meeting with the company's CTO. They liked the idea, but wanted to steer it in a direction that wouldn't solve the core issues I had found. That's when I realized I had to pursue this on my own. Around that time, I attended a tech conference in San Francisco, telling my family it was a required work trip. There, I met Allison Reed, a talented software engineer who shared my frustration with her company's narrow focus. We connected instantly over our shared ambitions. The solution you're describing could transform project management in real estate, she said during a coffee break after a panel discussion. I know, I replied, but no one's building it the right way. Maybe we should, she suggested casually. That remark sparked the beginning of Horizon Innovations. Allison and I spent the next 6 months developing our business plan, meeting nights and weekends. I kept up my facade at family gatherings, nodding along as they made assumptions about my administrative role. Still answering phones? Alexandra? Aunt Sylvia asked at Thanksgiving? Something like that, I replied. Mentally finalizing our pitch for angel investors, finding funding was our biggest challenge. I couldn't approach family connections without revealing my plans, and most investors were skeptical of 2 young women with limited experience. We faced 27 rejections before meeting Samuel Grant, a retired tech executive who had made his fortune disrupting the insurance industry. You're solving a real problem you understand deeply, not chasing a trendy idea, he said after our pitch. That was rare. He invested $250,000 for a 15% stake, enough for us to quit our jobs and work full-time on developing the platform. I told my family I'd been promoted to an executive assistant for a private investor, which explained my increased travel and absence from family events. They barely asked questions, assuming I'd found my level. The first year was brutal. Allison and I worked 18-hour days, living on ramen and coffee. We rented a tiny office in a rundown building and hired 2 recent computer science graduates who believed in our vision. There were technical problems we hadn't expected and market resistance we weren't ready for. 3 months in, a major coding issue threatened to derail the whole platform. I went 3 sleepless days working with Allison to redesign our approach. When we finally fixed it at 4 a.m. on the 3rd day, I broke down in tears from exhaustion and relief. We could actually do this. The solution elegantly solved multiple problems at once. Our first client was a small real estate developer in Phoenix who took a chance on our beta product. When our platform helped them identify and fix a regulatory issue that would have cost $1.2 million, word began to spread. We secured 3 more clients that month. Still, I kept up my cover story at Christmas dinner. As my brothers boasted about their achievements at Carter Enterprises, I sat quietly, exhausted from closing our 10th client. When the attention turned to me, I simply said things were going fine at my assistant job. At least you're employed, my father said, which was his version of approval. As Horizon grew, so did the challenge of maintaining my double life. I opened separate bank accounts, used a different email for family communications, and kept a small apartment near my parents' home for visits while living in San Francisco. I became skilled at deflecting questions and steering conversations away from my career. The strain was both emotional and logistical. Each time my family dismissed my work, it hurt. Despite my success, I built a protective shell, reminding myself their approval was no longer my goal. Yet part of me still longed for recognition, for my father to feel pride in me like he did for my brothers. Minor achievements. Why keep up the charade? Allison asked after a tough family weekend. You're already more successful than most people. I'm not ready yet, I admitted. I need to be undeniable before I reveal the truth. What I didn't say was I feared their reaction, not just surprise, but the chance they'd try to minimize my success even with proof. I needed to build something so impressive that even Aunt Sylvia couldn't undermine it with a cutting remark. So, I kept living this double life, fueling my determination with every dismissive comment and missed chance for my family to truly know me. Over 3 years, Horizon Innovations grew rapidly and made strategic moves. We expanded from 4 employees to over 50. Our property management platform evolved into a full suite of tools integrating project management, regulatory compliance, contractor coordination, and financial forecasting. We moved from a cramped office to an entire floor in a downtown San Francisco building with a view of the Bay Bridge. Yet to my family, I was still Alexandra Carter, the executive assistant. The contrast between my 2 lives became increasingly surreal. By day, I made decisions affecting millions, negotiated with major investors, and led a growing team. By night, during phone calls with my parents, I was still their daughter with a stable job who hadn't found the right partner. At 30, I was running a company valued at $75 million. After our Series B funding round, my personal net worth was in 8 figures on paper, yet I still shopped for modest clothes to wear at family events and kept a simple apartment in Connecticut for visits. You should consider buying instead of renting, my mother suggested during one visit, assuming my executive assistant's salary was my only income. It's never too early to build equity. I nodded silently. I already owned my San Francisco condo outright and had recently purchased a vacation property in Lake Tahoe. As Horizon scaled, building my executive team became a top priority. I hired people whose skills complemented mine and who shared my vision. Jessica Peters became our CTO, Robert Martinez our CFO, and Tara Franklin our CO. They became my chosen family, those who recognized my true abilities and pushed me to grow. You're the most impressive founder I've worked with, Tara said after we navigated a difficult quarter. Your strategic instincts are extraordinary. Her words meant more to me than she could know, filling a void left by years of familial dismissal. Still, I kept a professional distance, never sharing details about my family life. Only Allison knew the full story. Our first major breakthrough came when we developed a proprietary algorithm that could predict regulatory changes likely to impact development projects, allowing clients to adjust plans proactively. It was a game changer for the industry, reducing risks and saving millions. The trade publication Real Estate Technology Review featured our innovation with the headline, Horizon Innovations Redefines Risk Management in Development. I declined to be photographed for the article, preferring to keep the focus on the technology rather than personalities. In truth, I was protecting my anonymity from my family. I was listed simply as a Carter, CEO, in company materials and used a professional email that concealed my full name. We began acquiring smaller competitors, incorporating their innovations into our platform. Each acquisition strengthened our market position and broadened our client base. By year 4, we had become the dominant technology provider in our niche, with clients across North America and initial expansion into European markets. The complexity of maintaining my dual identity grew alongside our company. I used a series of shell companies and trusts to manage my personal wealth, keeping my name off public records whenever legally possible. I limited my appearances at industry events and avoided business functions in Connecticut or New York, where I might encounter family connections. Despite these precautions, there were close calls. At a major tech conference in Boston, I spotted my brother Christopher across the exhibition hall. I ducked behind our company's booth, sending Allison to represent us during that session. Later, Christopher mentioned attending the conference to my parents at a family dinner I was present for. You should see the innovations they're bringing to real estate tech, he said enthusiastically. There's this one company, Horizon, something that's completely changing the game. I nearly choked on my water as he continued. We should look into using their platform at Carter Enterprises. It could solve many of our efficiency problems. I'll look into it, my father replied dismissively. Those tech solutions are usually overpriced and underdelivered. I bit my tongue, knowing our platform could solve many of the issues their company faced. The most difficult part of my double life wasn't the practical challenges, but the emotional toll. Every milestone Horizon reached was celebrated with my team but kept secret from those I had grown up with. Each personal achievement, the purchase of my first luxury car, my first first-class international flight, or my first $1 million philanthropic donation, was shared with no one from my early life. I began seeing a therapist to manage the psychological weight of my choices. Dr. Karen helped me understand that my secret was more than just proving my family wrong. It was a shield, protecting me from rejection. What are you waiting for? She asked one session. What has to happen before you feel ready to tell the truth? After reflecting, I realized I was waiting for undeniable success, a level of achievement so significant that even my most critical family members couldn't diminish it. I wanted leverage, not just accomplishment. That opportunity came sooner than expected, though not as I imagined. As Horizon expanded, we made a strategic decision to enter government contracts. Developing specialized versions of our platform for municipal development projects, this led us to create a subsidiary investment group, Aurora Capital, to participate in public-private partnerships nationwide. Aurora's team identified promising projects that could benefit from both our technology and capital investment. What I didn't know was that one of these projects would soon bring my two worlds crashing together, forcing a reckoning I wasn't prepared for. I was reviewing quarterly projections with the executive team when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. Emergency family meeting this weekend. Your father insists everyone attend, no exceptions. The timing couldn't have been worse. We were finalizing our expansion into Asian markets, but family emergencies were rare, so I knew this was serious. I arranged to fly to Connecticut Friday, telling my team I'd be unavailable, except for genuine crises. Family stuff. I explained vaguely to Tara. Shouldn't take more than the weekend. What I didn't expect was walking into the eye of a financial hurricane. Carter Enterprises, my family's once solid real estate development company, was on the brink of bankruptcy. The tension was palpable when I entered my parents' living room. My father, Richard, looked 10 years older than the last time I saw him at Christmas. His face was drawn with stress. My mother sat beside him, clutch in his hand, her usual composed demeanor fractured by worry. My brothers occupied various spots around the room, their usual confidence replaced by tense, grim expressions. And Aunt Sylvia was there, of course, sitting primly in an armchair as if at a social tea rather than a crisis meeting. Finally, she said as I walked in, "Now we can begin." My father wasted no time. "Carter Enterprises is in trouble," he said, his voice unsteady. "The Westlake development project has failed catastrophically. Cost overruns, regulatory problems, contractor disputes, it's a perfect storm." Westlake was the company's largest project, a mixed-use development meant to revitalize a struggling neighborhood while generating substantial profits. It had been Christopher's chance to prove himself as the company's future. "We're facing potential bankruptcy," my father continued. "Everything we built over 40 years could be gone within months." My mother squeezed his hand tighter. "We've already taken second mortgages on both houses," she added softly. The gravity sank in not just the business, but my parents' personal assets were at risk. "How did this happen?" I asked, genuinely shocked by the scale of the disaster. Nathan shot a glare at Christopher. "Ask him, it's his project, his mess." Christopher's face reddened. "You were the one pushing to accelerate the timeline. We wouldn't have had these contractor problems if we'd stuck to the original schedule." "Boys," my father warned, "enough." But without any of his usual authority, Bradley jumped in. "We all know the real problem was inadequate due diligence on the regulatory requirements. The environmental remediation alone has cost millions we didn't budget for." The brothers volleyed blame back and forth, while I sat quietly, observing. The issues they described, contractor management, regulatory compliance, timeline coordination, were exactly the problems our Horizon platform was designed to prevent. The bitter irony was suffocating. The family business was failing from problems. My secretarial work had solved for hundreds of others. "What's the plan?" I finally asked, interrupting their circular firing squad. My father sighed heavily. "We have one potential lifeline. Maxwell Incorporated has offered to buy a controlling interest." I stiffened. The name Maxwell was notorious in the industry for acquiring distressed properties, stripping assets, then discarding the remains. Their reputation for slashing staff and reneging on community commitments was infamous. "That's corporate suicide," I said before I could stop myself. Everyone turned to me with varying degrees of surprise and annoyance. "And what would you know about it?" Aunt Patricia asked coldly. My father gave a dismissive wave. "Maxwell isn't ideal, but they're our only option right now." "Actually," my mother interjected, unusually assertive, "there's another possibility." She nodded to my father, who straightened slightly. "Yes. An investment group called Aurora Capital has expressed interest. They've offered a $100 million deal that would save the company, allow us to complete Westlake, and let the family retain some ownership." My blood ran cold. Aurora Capital, our subsidiary, my company, was the potential savior, and my family was pinning their hopes on it. This couldn't be happening. "The terms are much better than Maxwell's," Bradley admitted, "but we don't know much about them. They're very private." Christopher nodded. Their representative was impressive, though very knowledgeable, about the industry and our situation. I felt dizzy. That would have been James Harper, Aurora's chief investment officer, who reported directly to me. He had no idea of the connection. "When do you need to decide?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We have a meeting tomorrow with Aurora's CEO," my father said. "If all goes well, we sign papers immediately after. Maxwell has given us until end of business Monday to accept their offer, otherwise on." Patricia sniffed. "I still think Maxwell is the safer choice. We know who they are. This Aurora group came out of nowhere." I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood. The irony was almost too much to bear. My company, built by the secretary they all dismissed, was now poised to save or acquire the family business. "Where are you staying tonight, Mackenzie?" my mother asked. switching to practicalities. I have a hotel room in town, I replied automatically, my mind still racing. Nonsense, she said. Stay here. We need the family together right now. I agreed reluctantly, needing time alone to process and make calls. As the meeting broke up, Aunt Patricia cornered me by the staircase. It's times like these when we see who the strong ones are, she said pointedly, glancing at my brothers. Though I suppose it's a blessing you're not involved in the business, too much stress for a woman to handle. I smiled tightly. Everyone handles stress differently, I said quietly. Patricia smirked. Speaking of which, how's your little secretary job going? Still answering phones? The mockery in her voice was unmistakable. Even with the family business crumbling, she couldn't resist belittling me. Something like that, I replied with practiced calm. The same answer I'd given for years. Well, at least you have stability, she said with false kindness. Unlike your brothers, though you really should have aimed higher, dear. A woman your age should be more established. I excused myself and retreated to my old bedroom, now converted to a guest room, but still echoing with memories of childhood. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I made an encrypted call to Allison. We have a situation, I told her, keeping my voice low. Aurora is in talks to save my family's company, she gasped. I don't even know what that is. Cosmic irony. A disaster waiting to happen. I know, I replied. James has no idea. He's been negotiating with my family. The CEO they're expecting to meet tomorrow is me. So what are you going to do? I stared at the faded outline on the wall, where my business school acceptance letter had once hung removed by my mother, who thought it cluttered the room. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. But I think my cover is about to be blown whether I'm ready or not. The annual Wilson family reunion was scheduled for the same weekend as the emergency meeting, unfortunate timing that couldn't be changed, as relatives were already traveling from across the country. So, despite the crisis, Saturday afternoon found us at my parents' lake house, maintaining appearances with extended family who remained unaware of the company's precarious situation. I arrived deliberately late, having spent the morning in urgent calls with my executive team. We had temporarily halted Aurora's negotiations with Wilson Enterprises, citing internal review procedures buying me 24 hours to make an impossible decision. The lakeside property looked as it always had. Manicured lawns sloping to a private dock, white tents set up for a catered lunch, cousins' children running between tables while adults clustered in their usual social hierarchies. Nobody would guess the hosts faced financial ruin. I wore a simple blue sundress from a department store and minimal jewelry, my usual secretary-appropriate attire for family functions. My real wardrobe in San Francisco consisted of designer pieces and custom suits, but that Mackenzie remained carefully hidden. There she is. My cousin Emma called as I approached the main tent. The career girl. Several relatives turned to look, offering the same patronizing smiles I'd grown accustomed to. I braced myself for the usual barrage of questions about my non-existent love life and mythical secretary position. Aunt Patricia materialized at my side, champagne flute in hand despite the early hour. Mackenzie, darling, we were just discussing you, she said loudly enough to pause nearby conversations. Tell everyone about your job still with that same little company. I maintained my practiced smile. Yes. Still there? And what is it you do again? Answer phones. Schedule meetings. Her tone made it clear these were beneath consideration. As real career options, I assist the executive team. I replied vaguely the same answer I'd given for years. My cousin Thomas, who worked in finance in Boston, joined the conversation. You know, Mackenzie, I could probably help you find something with more potential. My firm is always looking for sharp administrative staff. That's so kind, I replied, the words tasting like ash. Thomas's firm was actually one of Horizon's clients, though he wouldn't know that from his mid-level position. She's content where she is, Patricia interjected. Not everyone has ambition. She turned to the wider group. Mackenzie has always been the cautious one. Safe choices. I felt the familiar burn of anger but tamped it down. As I had countless times before, my father caught my eye across the tent and gave a small shake of his head, his silent signal to keep family harmony at all costs. My brothers worked the crowd separately, maintaining the family facade despite their own anxieties. Nathan was deep in conversation with an uncle who was a retired banker, perhaps seeking last-minute advice. Bradley charmed a group of cousins with a story that had them laughing, his sales skills deployed to distract from reality. Christopher stood alone by the lake, the weight of the failed project visible in his posture. Lunch was served, and I found myself seated at a table with Aunt Patricia, her daughter Melissa, and several other relatives who immediately turned the conversation to their children's accomplishments. Jason just made partner at his law firm, announced my second cousin Diane, youngest in the firm's history. Elizabeth's art gallery in Chelsea is expanding to a second location, added another cousin. My Stephen just closed a $20 million deal for his company, said Aunt Patricia. Though everyone knew Stephen worked in middle management and had likely been peripheral to any such deal, eventually, all eyes turned to me expectantly. And what about you, Mackenzie? Any exciting developments? Asked Diane, her forced interest betraying the expectation of a lackluster answer. Before I could respond, Aunt Patricia jumped in. Mackenzie is very dedicated to her secretary position. What is it now? 10 years with the same company. Such loyalty is rare these days. The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. Several relatives exchanged glances that mixed pity with relief that their own children were more successful. It's actually an executive assistant position, I corrected mildly, though the distinction would matter little to them, of course. Dear Aunt Patricia said with exaggerated patience, executive assistant, much more prestigious. Do you get to order the special coffee now? The table erupted in polite laughter at my expense. Something inside me began to crack. A decade of dismissal, condensation, and minimization crystallized. In that moment of collective laughter, I had built a company valued at hundreds of millions, employed over 100 people, transformed an industry, and here I was, mocked for fetching coffee. I was saved from responding by a commotion at the entrance to the tent. Martin Sterling, my family's longtime lawyer, hurried toward my father, his expression urgent despite his attempts at discretion. My father excused himself from his conversation and met Martin halfway. They spoke in hushed tones, but in the sudden quiet of the tent, as people watched curiously, snippets carried over. CEO of Aurora will only meet with the entire family. Leadership insists on all principals being present tomorrow. Deal could fall through without immediate signatures. My father's already strained face grew more troubled. He beckoned my brothers to join the conversation. I remained seated, watching the family drama unfold while appearing uninvolved. A role I had perfected. Aunt Patricia couldn't resist the opportunity to comment. More business troubles. That's what happens when a company doesn't adapt with the times. If Richard had listened to Stephen's advice years ago about diversification, I tuned out her revisionist history, knowing her son had never offered my father any substantive business advice. Instead, I watched as my brother's expressions shifted from concern to alarm. Eventually, my father approached our table. Mackenzie, excuse us for a moment. Family, business matter. The exclusion, so routine I usually didn't notice it anymore, struck me with fresh pain, given the circumstances. I was being dismissed from a discussion about a company unknowingly dealing with my company. Of course, I replied automatically, standing to leave. Actually, Aunt Patricia interjected. Mackenzie might have valuable input after all. She is an executive assistant. Perhaps she could tell you how proper businesses handle these situations. The table again rippled with laughter. My brothers looked embarrassed but said nothing. My father, distracted by the crisis, barely noticed the mockery. We need to discuss some sensitive business matters, he said apologetically. Enjoy the party, everyone. As my father and brothers retreated to the house with Martin, Patricia raised her glass to the Wilson men. She carries the burden of the family legacy while the rest of us enjoy the benefits. I locked eyes with her, something in my expression finally giving her pause. Is something wrong, Mackenzie? She asked with false concern. Nothing at all, I replied, setting down my napkin. If you'll excuse me, I need some air. I walked down to the dock, away from the party, and stared across the lake. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, they would learn that the secretary they had dismissed for a decade was the CEO, whose signature they desperately needed. The question was, what did I want that outcome to look like? Revenge had been my fantasy for years, seeing their shocked faces, watching Aunt Patricia sputter apologies, forcing my brothers to acknowledge my success. But now that the moment approached, I wondered if triumph would taste as sweet as I had. I imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from Allison. Decision time. What do you want to do? I took a deep breath of lake air, the same air I had breathed as a teenager dreaming of proving myself. The girl with the business presentation in a blue folder, crying in her room after being laughed out of the dining room. I texted back. Booked the conference room at the Western Hotel for 10 a.m. tomorrow. Alert the team. It's time. Back at the party, I made my excuses and left early, claiming a headache. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the family gathering growing smaller in the distance. The next time I saw them, everything would be different. Whether that difference would heal old wounds or create new ones remained to be seen. In my hotel room, I laid out my CEO clothes for the morning, the armor I would wear to face my family as my true self for the first time. I spent the night alternating between strategic planning calls with my team and staring at the ceiling, replaying a decade of dismissive comments and wondering if tomorrow would finally silence them by dawn. I had made my decision. This wasn't just about revenge or recognition anymore. It was about integrity, being whole instead of divided. Whatever happened, I would no longer live a double life after tomorrow. I arrived at the Western Hotel 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting. My executive team had flown in overnight. Allison, our CTO, Jessica, CFO, Robert, and Kutara waited in a separate room, ready to join once I'd had my initial conversation with my family. Are you sure about this? Allison asked, as we reviewed our strategy one final time. Her concern wasn't about the business decision Aurora acquiring Wilson Enterprises made strategic sense, but about the personal fallout. No, I admitted, but it's time. I had chosen my appearance carefully, a tailored charcoal suit that projected authority without ostentation, subtle makeup that enhanced rather than masked, and the one piece of significant jewelry I allowed myself. My grandmother Eleanor's diamond earrings. My hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, rather than the softer style I typically wore at family functions. Precisely 9:55 a.m., I took my position in the main conference room, standing at the head of the table with my back to the door, gazing out at the city skyline. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my exterior remained composed. Years of board meetings and investor pitches had taught me to project calm, regardless of my inner state. I heard them before I saw them. My father's authoritative voice directing questions to Martin Sterling, my brother's overlapping voices, speculating about the meeting's purpose. They entered in a cluster, still talking among themselves. "The CEO of Aurora should be here any minute," Martin was saying. He stopped mid-sentence as they registered my presence by the window. Confusion rippled through the group. "Mackenzie," my father said, puzzled. "What are you doing here?" "We're about to have an important business meeting," I said, turning slowly to face them, holding deliberate eye contact with my father. "I know that's why I'm here." My brothers exchanged confused glances. Christopher stepped forward. "Mac, I'm sorry, but this is seriously confidential. Maybe Mom needs help with something while we're tied up here." The condescension in his well-meaning suggestion only strengthened my resolve. I moved to the head of the conference table and gestured to the chairs. "Please, everyone, take a seat." Something in my tone, a note of authority they'd never heard before, gave them pause. Martin Sterling, always sensitive to power dynamics, was the first to comply, selecting a chair midway down the table. My father remained standing. "Mackenzie, I don't know what this is about, but we're waiting for the CEO of Aurora Capital. This is not the time for whatever. The CEO of Aurora Capital is already here," I replied evenly. "I'm the CEO of Aurora Capital and of its parent company, Horizon Innovations." The silence that followed was absolute. My father's face went blanca, reset before any emotion could register. Nathan's jaw literally dropped. Bradley blinked rapidly, as though his vision had malfunctioned. Christopher looked from me to our father and back again, seeking confirmation this was some kind of joke. Martin Sterling, ever the professional, recovered first. "Miss Wilson," he began carefully, "are you saying that you are the M. Wilson listed as founder and CEO of Horizon Innovations?" "That's correct, Martin. The company is currently valued at approximately $350 million, $375 million after last quarter's results," I added gently. My father finally found his voice. "This is absurd. You're an executive assistant." "No," I said. "That was a cover story. I've been building Horizon for the past 8 years, starting shortly after graduation." "But why?" Christopher asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Before I could answer, the conference room door opened again, and Aunt Patricia swept in 15 minutes late. As was her custom at any meeting she considered beneath her. "Sorry, I'm late, but I hardly think my presence is necessary for..." She stopped abruptly, taking in the tableau. "Mackenzie, what is this?" "Take your daughter to work day." She laughed at her own joke. No one joined her. The tension in the room was palpable. "Patricia," my father said tightly, "apparently Mackenzie is claiming to be the CEO of Aurora Capital." "Don't be ridiculous, Richard," she scoffed. "She's a secretary." I pressed the intercom button on the conference phone. "Please send in the executive team." The door opened again, and my team entered. Dallison, Jessica, Robert, and Terry, each carrying tablets with presentation materials, dressed in impeccable business attire that matched the seriousness of the occasion. "Allow me to introduce my executive team," I said calmly. Allison Reed, co-founder and chief strategy officer. Jessica Peters, chief technology officer. Robert Martinez, chief financial officer. And Tara Franklin, chief operating officer. They took their positions around the room, professional and poised. The power dynamic shifted visibly as my family suddenly found themselves outnumbered and outflanked. "This is preposterous," Aunt Patricia declared. "Richard, call security. This is clearly some kind of prank or scam." "It's neither, Ms. Wilson Hughes," Tara responded coolly. "Horizon Innovations and its subsidiary, Aurora Capital, are well-established entities with impeccable credentials. We can provide any documentation you require to verify Ms. Wilson's position." Robert activated the large screen on the wall, displaying Horizon's corporate structure, financial highlights, and media coverage, all with my name and position clearly indicated. My father sank slowly into a chair, his eyes fixed on the screen. "All this time?" he murmured. "All these years?" "Yes," I confirmed. "While you thought I was answering phones, I was building a company that has revolutionized the industry, the same industry where Wilson Enterprises is now failing." Nathan's shock transformed to anger. "This is why Aurora was interested in our company, some kind of revenge plot." "No," I replied firmly. Aurora identified Wilson Enterprises as a potential acquisition target through standard market analysis. The team had no idea of our connection until I informed them yesterday. In fact, I temporarily halted negotiations when I discovered the situation. So what happens now? Bradley asked, his sales instincts kicking in, already calculating how to adapt to this new reality. That depends, I answered. Aurora's offer remains on the table, but I wanted to have this conversation before proceeding. For obvious reasons, I needed to disclose the conflict of interest. Conflict of interest. Aunt Patricia's voice rose shrilly. This is manipulation, deception. I turned to face her directly. Deception, Aunt Patricia. Like telling a 16-year-old girl with legitimate business ideas that she should focus on finding a husband instead. Like dismissing someone's career as just answering phones without bothering to learn what they actually do. That kind of deception. Her face flushed red. You've always been too sensitive. We were trying to guide you toward realistic expectations. My expectations were perfectly realistic, I countered. I expected that hard work, innovation, and perseverance would lead to success. What wasn't realistic was expecting my own family to recognize my potential. Christopher looked genuinely distressed. Mac, we never meant to. 8 years, I interrupted. For 8 years, I've sat at family dinners listening to you all mock my supposed career. While I was building something significant, yesterday at the reunion, Aunt Patricia suggested I get to order this special coffee now. As an executive assistant, and everyone laughed. Do you have any idea what that felt like? My father raised his hands in a placating gesture. Mackenzie, clearly we've underestimated you. That's obvious now, but this subterfuge was unnecessary. Why not just tell us what you were doing? Because you wouldn't have believed me, I said simply. You would have dismissed it as a girl's fantasy just like you dismissed every business idea I ever presented. I needed to succeed first. Nathan broke the silence, his voice sharp with a mix of frustration and disbelief. You've made your point. You've succeeded. Is the plan now to let our company fail as some kind of object lesson? The question hung in the air. The core issue finally spoken aloud. My team remained professionally impassive, but I knew they were watching carefully. This was no longer just business, it was personal in a way that could cloud judgment. I took a deep breath. No, Aurora's offer is legitimate and fair. The acquisition makes strategic sense for both companies. Wilson Enterprises has valuable land, assets, and development experience. Horizon has the technology that could address precisely the issues that led to the Westlake failure. My father studied me with new eyes, reassessing everything he thought he knew about his daughter and the terms. The $100 million valuation stands, he asked cautiously. I confirmed. Yes. The Wilson family would retain a 20% ownership stake in the restructured company. There will be positions for those with the appropriate skills, who are willing to adapt to our corporate culture and technology integration, and who will lead this new entity. Bradley's eyes sharpened as he asked, and who would lead? I met his gaze firmly. Aurora's current leadership remains in place. I stated clearly, including me as CEO. The implication was unmistakable. My father and brothers, after a lifetime of authority, would answer to me if they remained at all. Aunt Patricia gasped theatrically. Richard, you can't possibly consider this. It's unnatural. Maxwell's offer, my father interrupted, surprising me. He hadn't taken his eyes off me. You've really built all this yourself? Mackenzie. Something in his tone, a mixture of disbelief and the first glimmer of respect, made my throat tighten. With a great team. But yes, he nodded slowly. I'd like to see the full terms. I'll need time to discuss this with the family. Of course, I agreed. My team has prepared comprehensive documentation. We can give you the room to review it privately. As my executives distributed tablets with the acquisition details, I caught Christopher watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. When our eyes met, he gave a small, rueful smile. All those times you asked questions about our projects, he said quietly. You weren't just being polite, were you? You were gathering market intelligence. I was trying to help, I corrected. You just weren't listening. As we prepared to leave my family to their deliberations, Aunt Patricia made one final attempt to reassert her influence. This is still manipulation, she declared loudly. Using inside knowledge of family troubles to swoop in like some corporate vulture. I stopped at the door and turned back to face her. No, Aunt Patricia, this is business, something you've always insisted I wouldn't understand. The door closed behind us, leaving my family to confront both their company's future and their recalibrated understanding of the daughter and sister they had underestimated for so long. 6 months after the revelation meeting, I stood in the atrium of the newly renamed Wilson Horizon Tower, watching employees from both companies mingle at our integration celebration. The merger had been completed 3 months earlier. After intense negotiations and significant restructuring, the changes were substantial. My father had taken a position as chairman emeritus, a largely ceremonial role acknowledging his founding contributions while shifting actual authority to new leadership. At 72, he had initially resisted the transition but eventually recognized it was time to step back. Nathan had left the company entirely, unable to accept the new hierarchy. Last I heard, he was starting his own boutique development firm in Chicago, maintaining minimal contact with the family. His departure had been acrimonious, but ultimately necessary. His management style was fundamentally incompatible with our data-driven approach. Bradley had surprised everyone. By thriving in the new environment, his sales skills translated well to our expanded client outreach initiatives, and he demonstrated unexpected adaptability to technological integration. We weren't close exactly, but we had established a mutually respectful professional relationship. Christopher had taken the changes hardest, initially blaming himself for the Westlake failure that had precipitated everything. After some soul-searching, he accepted a position leading our community development initiatives, where his genuine passion for neighborhood revitalization could be channeled effectively. He was currently completing an executive MBA program at my suggestion, filling gaps in his previously intuitive approach to management. My mother had perhaps undergone the most profound transformation. After the initial shock, she approached me privately with decades of pent-up regret. I should have supported you, she admitted during a tearful lunch. I let my own compromises dictate the limitations I set for you. Our relationship was healing gradually, as she shared stories of her own abandoned career aspirations, and I helped her rediscover her marketing expertise through volunteer work with women entrepreneurs. Aunt Patricia remained Aunt Patricia critical, judgmental, and permanently convinced my success was some combination of luck and manipulation. I had made peace with the fact her approval would never command, more importantly, that I no longer needed it. Quite a turnout, Allison commented, joining me at the railing, overlooking the celebration. Better than expected, I agreed. The culture integration is proceeding faster than projections. Speaking of which, she nodded toward the entrance where my father had just arrived in characteristically, without my mother at his side. I made my way through the crowd to greet him. At family gatherings, we maintained cordial but somewhat distant relations. This was his first appearance at a company function since the ceremonial ribbon cutting 3 months ago. Dad, I said, genuinely pleased. I didn't expect you today. He looked around the modernized space that had once been Wilson Enterprises' traditional lobby. Thought I should see how things are going. We stood in slightly awkward silence before he added, your mother wanted to come, but she's at that mentoring event with her women's entrepreneurship group. I know. I helped her prepare her presentation yesterday. He nodded clearly, still adjusting to the new dynamic between his wife and daughter. The quarterly report was impressive. He offered. The Westlake project completion under the new system saved significant costs. Coming from him, this was praise. The technology made the difference, I acknowledged, but the land acquisition strategy you developed gave us the foundation to build on. Another silence, less awkward this time. I still don't understand why you felt you couldn't tell us, he finally said, returning to the question he'd asked repeatedly since the revelation. 8 years, Mackenzie, your own family. I considered my answer carefully. We'd had versions of this conversation before, but perhaps here, surrounded by the tangible evidence of what I'd built, I could finally make him truly understand. Do you remember when I was 16 and presented that marketing and efficiency plan at dinner? Everyone laughed. He shifted uncomfortably. We didn't realize you were serious. That's exactly the point, Dad. You didn't take me seriously. None of you did. Can you honestly say you would have believed in Horizon if I told you about it at the beginning? Would you have encouraged me the way you encouraged the boys? His silence was answer enough. I needed to succeed on my own terms, I continued. Without family connections, without the Wilson name opening doors, I needed to know I could do it myself. And now, was it worth the deception? I gestured around us at the thriving company. This is worth it. Building something meaningful is worth it. But the deception that took a toll, I'm only now beginning to process it. He seemed to consider this. Your grandmother would be proud, he said finally. She always said you had the best head for business in the family. I should have listened to her. The mention of Grandma Eleanor brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I wish she could have seen this. She knew, he said with surprising gentleness. Maybe not the specifics, but she knew you would succeed. That's why she left you those earrings. They were her lucky charm in business dealings with men who underestimated her. I touched the diamond earrings. I was wearing the same ones I'd worn to the Revelation meeting, in every important business event since. I had no idea they held that significance. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several key clients. As I made introductions, I noticed my father watching me with something I'd never seen before in his expression, respect, tinged with regret. Later that evening, after the celebration wound down, I sat alone in my office reviewing our latest expansion plans when there was a knock at the door. Christopher stepped in. Got a minute? He asked, lingering in the doorway. Sure. Everything okay with the community outreach for Riverside? All on track, he confirmed, taking a seat across from me. But that's not why I'm here. He hesitated, then pushed forward. I owe you an apology, not just for recently, but for, well, pretty much our entire lives. I set down my tablet, giving him my full attention. I never actively tried to undermine you, he continued, but I never stood up for you either. I benefited from the family dynamic without questioning it. That was wrong. His sincerity was evident and somewhat disarming. Christopher had always been the kindest of my brothers, but kindness without advocacy had still left me isolated. Why now? I asked. My executive MBA program, he said with a rueful smile. We had a session on unconscious bias in business. The professor could have been describing our family as a case study. He leaned forward, but also because I've seen you in action these past months. You're brilliant at this, Mac. Better than Dad ever was. Better than any of us could have been. The compliment delivered without reservation meant more than I wanted to admit. Thank you, I said simply. Do you think we can ever be a real family again? He asked. Not just business associates who happen to share DNA. I considered the question seriously. I think we're finding a new equilibrium. It won't be what it was, but maybe it can be something more authentic. After Christopher left, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. The revelation had brought professional triumph, but it had also forced me to confront the emotional cost of my double life, working with a new therapist. I was gradually processing the complex mixture of vindication, lingering hurt, and unexpected grief for the family relationships I had wished for, rather than the ones I had actually experienced. The company continued to thrive. Our integration of Wilson's assets with Horizon's technology created synergies beyond our initial projections. Industry publications called it a model merger, and our stock rose accordingly. I had finally stepped fully into the public eye as CEO, giving interviews and accepting speaking engagements that would have been impossible during my years of hiding. One unexpected consequence of going public with my identity was the response from young women in business and technology. I began receiving hundreds of messages from aspiring entrepreneurs who saw in my story a reflection of their own struggles to be taken seriously. This led to the creation of the Eleanor Wilson Foundation, named for my grandmother, which provides mentorship and seed funding to women launching technology companies. At our first foundation event, I shared the podium with my mother, who spoke movingly about the importance of supporting women's ambitions without limitation. Watching her find her voice was perhaps the most healing aspect of the entire experience. The buzzing of my phone interrupted my reflections. A text from Allison reminded me about tomorrow's board meeting. Life continued forward, with new challenges and opportunities constantly emerging. The past could not be changed, but its lessons continued to inform my approach to both business and personal relationships. I had built my success in secret, driven partly by the need to prove my family wrong. Now that the truth was known, I was discovering a different kind of strength, the power of visible leadership, of letting my full self be seen, both vulnerabilities and capabilities. The company I had built in secrecy now flourished in the light. The family that had once dismissed me now grappled with the reality of my accomplishments in various ways, some adapting, others resistant, and I continued to evolve, integrating the driven, secretive founder with the public leader I was becoming. The journey hadn't ended with the revelation in many ways. That had simply been the beginning of a new chapter. There would always be those who underestimated me or questioned my legitimacy, and Patricia would certainly never change, but I no longer needed universal approval to validate my worth. Success, I had learned, was not measured solely by financial metrics or public recognition, though these had their place. True success lay in building something meaningful, in remaining true to one's vision, despite obstacles, and in using achievement as a platform to create opportunities for others. As I prepared to leave the office, I paused at the window overlooking the city lights. The path forward wasn't entirely clear, but it was mine to determine, no longer constrained by others' limited expectations. My own need for secrecy. I thought of all the women watching my journey now, looking to me as an example. To them, I would say this: your worth is not determined by others' recognition. Build your dreams anyway. Success is the best response to those who doubt you. But remember, vindication, while sweet, is not the end goal. The true measure of achievement is not proving others wrong, but proving yourself right. Have you ever been underestimated by those closest to you? How did you respond? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if my journey resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life stories of perseverance, and share with someone who might need to be reminded of their own potential today. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the people who know you least are the ones you've known the longest.